Listening to Fear. As Joyce's condition worsens, a space demon arrives.
We open with Buffy and Dawn spending time with Joyce as she's being prepped for surgery in a few days.
And I thought their filler conversation about gelatin was actually a pretty good one for once. Usually when they try to just stick in a generic conversation, it's a really awkward dialogue.
You're just anti-cow.
That's irrelevant. That's coincidental. And Buffy says that since she's going to stay with Joyce that night, Riley and the others are on patrol.
And then we cut to the gang getting the shit beat out of them
by two measly vampires. And again, they have surprisingly little annoying dialogue.
And I noticed Willow just kind of taps them both with that stake. She even pulls back as soon as it makes contact.
Yeah, and then she stands there and waits for the special effects shot to end before going after the next one. They complain about Riley not showing up, and we cut to him sitting somewhere getting his arm blood sucked by a vampire, while overly dramatic music plays.
Is that building where he's been living?
No idea.
Later, Willow visits the hospital with gifts and talks a lot because she's anxious about Joyce.
Joyce gets a headache, which may have been because of the tumor or just because of these strained attempts at humorous dialogue. And while Buffy and Willow are talking about class, Joyce has a weird outburst.
I don't even know if I'm going to take that exam.
I'd rip it in half and stick it in bed with me.
But she doesn't realize that she just had a weird outburst.
Outside the room, Buffy and Willow explain to Dawn, as if she's 5, that the tumor is to blame for Joyce's behavior and that after the surgery she should be back to normal.
And when Dawn expresses concern, Buffy says that Willow says that Joyce will be fine, which is kind of a dick move in the case that Joyce isn't fine because Dawn will just blame Willow.
And we see that even in a hospital setting, these characters take up all the space in the hallway when they walk.
They walk past some dude babbling incoherently, who was actually the security guard from that other episode.
And he says weird things about Dawn, like there is no data and there is no one in there.
So we get that nice little Star Trek crossover.
And the people that are with him don't try to pull him away or apologize or say anything at all. Between them and the Magic Box patrons that don't speak, I was starting to wonder if there's some kind of subplot developing with the gentleman coming back or something.
Nurse Ben shows up out of this entire hospital. He's right there. He's always right where Buffy is because he's stalking her. And he says that the mental ward is full. So they're sending patients with families home.
At night, Willow and Tara lay on a rooftop and contemplate the stars and their place in the universe.
And I was hoping they'd do that thing where fake lines appear between the stars to show the constellations, because that was a very 2000s thing. But then they do an equally 2000s thing instead, and they have a big fake CGI meteor flash across the sky.
When it crashes, we see the perspective of something that comes out of the meteorite and latches onto Peter Parker's motorcycle. And it attacks the guy who got brained by Glory, who is wandering around outside at night for some reason.
And this whole scene felt very, very much like an X-Files cold open, all the way to where the guy was attacked.
Ticket, please.
Then the monster, despite not being very sneaky, manages to sneak into the hospital. So maybe it's just a really easy hospital to sneak in and out of.
So it got to the hospital, it made it inside, and is crawling on the ceiling. And I was hoping at this point the explanation would be that nobody could see it. Because if people could see it, they would see it.
I mean, how is it clinging to the ceiling? You'd think it was leaving some kind of slime trail or something, but apparently not.
And what? Nobody in this universe looks up? I mean, I look up at my... Oh, shit!
Buffy and Joyce tell the doctor that they want to go home. He says it's not the best idea, but Joyce gets agitated, saying she can't just sit there waiting for the surgery.
And when Buffy pushes, the doctor says, okay, but there's a shit ton of stuff you need to do. And Buffy says no problem, because she's always super responsible, and she doesn't have constant activities that keep her away from doing everyday tasks.
Meanwhile, the monster creeps up on Dawn in the waiting area.
And no one seems to notice. It's not even hiding. It's just on the ceiling.
And now that I think about it, that scene doesn't go anywhere. The monster doesn't do anything to Dawn. Spoiler.
The rest of the gang is at the meteor site, and Riley just slaps his hand all over that thing like a complete dumbass.
and they say it looks hollow, and somehow immediately agree that something evil must have been inside, and they decide to go look for it.
And because this is Buffy the Vampire Slayer, they are 100% correct.
And they immediately find the dead crazy guy who Willow recognizes from the hospital.
And Riley finds black ooze inside the guy's mouth.
They agree that they can't call Buffy because she's busy with Joyce, so everyone decides to go do research, except for Riley, who ridiculously says, "See if you can find any other clues. I'll be examining this. Hope this is not Chris's blood."
And I thought when he sent everyone else off, he was just going to go find another vampire to suck him off again.
Yeah, I thought that's why he was separating himself from everyone, but it turns out that he calls the initiative. So why doesn't he want them to know about that?
Which made me sigh and groan and vomit all at the same time. It was pretty gross.
In the hospital, one of the crazified patients is slimed by the space monster.
Joyce is getting ready to go, and Buffy is clearly overwhelmed by all the shit she has to do, while they're all being watched by the alien.
When they get home, Joyce complains about how bright the lights are, so Buffy takes her upstairs and turns them all off, which the music thinks is scary for some reason.
Yeah, it was a crossover with Are You Afraid of the Dark? People don't even know what that is anymore.
Yeah, that's true.
It was a show. Riley is in a field when an initiative helicopter lands and he leads them to the dead guy. And the commandos say they want to analyze the goo, but Riley throws out a bunch of information that he wouldn't know because he's just a guy in the woods without any scientific equipment, including that the goo isn't dangerous, is dissolving too quickly to be of any use, and they should follow the radiation trail, even though he said before to the gang that there was no radiation, which he also wouldn't have any way of knowing, and again, he was rubbing his hands all over that thing.
Made me feel like I was watching an episode of TNG. And Riley's conclusion that it would automatically be radioactive because it came from space made no sense. I mean, nothing in this whole episode really made sense.
Correct.
The monster sneaks around the Summers house, as does Joyce. Buffy and Dawn find Joyce trying to cook breakfast, and she tells Buffy she is disgustingly fat, which I assume was a line that Joss Whedon stuck in there.
So she breaks a bunch of shit, almost sets the house on fire, and insults people. What a great idea it was to not only bring her home, but not even monitor her.
And when they try to put her to bed, she recoils from Dawn and says she doesn't know what she is or how she got there, causing Dawn to run away upset.
Buffy goes to comfort her, and Dawn says Joyce isn't the only one who called her a thing. And she brings up the guy from earlier in the episode, and she actually brings up that dude who claimed he was a cat. Isn't that what it was?
Yeah, something like that.
And also said a bunch of weird stuff, and she's very distraught that everybody, that's in quotes, is telling her she isn't real.
But Buffy assures her that there isn't anything wrong with her and tells her not to listen to them.
The gang is still researching, and Giles, having come off of a pretty intense game of Doom, says that the alien is actually a demon.
That's what you were excited to say? Okay.
I'm always excited to talk about Doom.
So it's another TNG crossover.
Were there demons?
Well, the Doom episode. The one with Loxana.
Oh, yeah. All right, now we're like cross-indexing references.
Xander spouts out some especially dumb dialogue while they research meteorite impacts, and Willow discovers that back in the Middle Ages, there were periods of lots of people going crazy that suddenly died down after a meteorite impact, and they determine that someone must have summoned a demon, and automatically decide that it must have been Glory.
Because why the hell not? That's in my notes. I also like how all other demon and supernatural activity that is always constantly going on in this town suddenly stops when the main antagonist of the season decides to do something.
Yeah, that is a problem that I have as well.
So they call Riley, who is at the hospital in the mental ward with a bunch of dead patients, and he says they have the demon holed up in the air ducts. He thinks. He's not sure, and he doesn't. So he's an idiot.
And I was confused for a second when Willow was surprised that Riley was at the hospital when she's the one that called him. So I was thinking, how could she not know where he is? Then I realized that Riley was using a high-tech piece of initiative technology known as a cellular telephone.
At the Summers house, Joyce is raving upstairs, which is driving Dawn crazy in the next room, and Buffy downstairs turns up the radio so she doesn't have to listen to it, and she starts to lose it. What a great idea it was to not only bring Joyce home, but not even monitor her and actively work to not have to listen to her.
And I thought that scene would have been much more effective without the most generic stock music that I've ever heard playing on the radio.
Yeah, and it was this little 5-second loop over and over and over again.
It actually reminded me a little bit of the music from Portal that always plays on the radios when you're walking around, except that music is actually like a real tune, so I don't know. And we see that Joyce isn't talking to herself, she's talking to the space demon. Back at the hospital, idiot number 2 is using another high-tech initiative device, this time a tricorder, to track the demon, and the trail ends outside.
And I was just curious what the rest of the patients and hospital staff thought, seeing all of these dudes decked in black with berets and rifles just wandering through the building. At least in the X-Files, they close everyone out, and Mulder tries to get in, but he's blocked by a military dude, and then he goes back to Scully, and she says, we should just go home, and he's like, I gotta figure something out, and then he sees, like, a laundry cart or something, and then the next shot's him inside the hospital. I really wanted to watch the X-Files during this whole episode.
And you were also thinking a lot more logically than I was. At this point, I was pretty much checked out.
Oh, I didn't realize you were a patient at the mental ward.
That's what happens when you watch too much Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Riley figures out that the demon must have latched onto a car and realizes that Joyce left earlier that day. And throughout the scene, the commanding officer keeps asking stupid questions that Riley and idiot number 2 have literally just answered. He's repeating the things that they just said, but in the form of a question.
Trail stops here, edge of the parking lot.
It stops.
Hitched a ride, probably underneath.
So some poor mental patient checks out of here today, drives away with this thing, took it right to its own home.
And I like how one of the initiative guys says, we should check who was discharged today. And Riley cuts him off, saying he knows exactly where that thing's going, which he does not. He assumes it's going after Joyce, but he doesn't know. He doesn't even let the guy finish his sentence.
And we know that he has a cell phone now, but he doesn't try to call Buffy. The demon slimes Joyce, but Dawn busts in and knocks it off with a coat rack. And then she looks around as if the demon could be anywhere, but she's the one who knocked it off the bed, so she should know where it is, and of course that's where it is.
And it's huge.
I was impressed, though, when it chases her and she starts closing and blocking all the doors. I thought that was a surprisingly smart thing for a character in this show to do, but it doesn't work.
She screams for Buffy, who runs upstairs and is also attacked.
But the demon scurries away, so she grabs a knife from the kitchen and goes looking for it when Spike suddenly pops out of the basement.
For absolutely no reason.
And Buffy immediately gets distracted from looking for the demon. He says that he was stealing stuff from down there, but she somehow notices in the dark, and I went back to watch it again, and I couldn't see what was going on, that he's putting pictures of her in his pocket. So was he looking through photo albums of her in the basement? Or was he taking pictures of her secretly? I don't know. And then the demon jumps out and attacks Spike. And due to her high levels of training, Buffy immediately gets the knife knocked out of her hand and then just stands there until the demon attacks her.
She grabs the knife again and stabs it a bunch of times.
Recreating the scene with the giant sea louse from The Return of Godzilla.
Oh, okay.
You don't remember that? That's immediately what I thought of when she's like stabbing. It's the same as the scene in the movie. It's like the same shots and everything.
You watch Godzilla movies like I watch James Bond movies.
Oh, jeez. Okay.
Yeah, see, that's how I feel. And she kills the alien demon right as the initiative guys bust in. And they also see Spike, who they still know about, but they still don't do anything.
Yeah, I thought that's what the scene was going to turn into, was them grabbing Spike. But we don't actually find out what happened. I mean, I assume he just left, and they all just left.
Yeah, the same way he just showed up.
Buffy runs up to tell Joyce and Dawn that everything is okay, and then we cut to the hospital,
where we see Ben walking to his car with his shirt on for a change.
And he finds Glory's simp demon in the back seat. It asks him why he summoned the space demon, and he says he's cleaning up Glory's mess like he's done all his life.
Then he peels out. That's important. I have it in bold in my notes. It's underlined.
I mean, it's character development. Later, Joyce is back at the hospital.
She's prepping for surgery and tells Buffy she had a moment of truth that told her Dawn is not hers.
Buffy confirms it, but doesn't actually explain anything. And Joyce makes her promise to take care of Dawn if anything happens to her. Then they wheel her off to surgery in the most dramatic way possible. Listening to Fear. Overall, I'm curious what you're going to say about this one.
I have a lot to say about this one. So now there are aliens, but not just aliens. Aliens that are also demons. 3 questions. Why was this episode made? How was it approved? And why was it allowed to air? An episode that really focuses on Joyce's condition and how it's affecting her children is overshadowed by a slimy alien demon slithering all over town. This whole episode could have been about Joyce and how it affected not just Buffy and Dawn, but the rest of the characters indirectly, since they regularly interact with Buffy and Dawn. It was a mistake for the writers to try and keep the Summers family and the rest of the characters separate for this episode. It made it seem like none of them outside of Buffy and Dawn even give a shit. Weren't Joyce and Giles starting to build a relationship at one point?
I don't know. There were times when it seemed like maybe, but then other times not, so I don't know.
Because they were hanging out. Buffy would find them together.
Were they hanging out?
I remember them both talking to Buffy at one point when she got home.
Yeah, I do remember that. Well, I think that was the episode with the chocolate bars, though, and then they ended up banging and then they were uncomfortable.
I thought it was after that one.
Maybe, I don't know. Put it in the comments. Tell us why we're wrong.
Willow did show up for a little bit, but didn't really work. It was clear that Buffy was in way over her head when the doctor gave her everything to take care of Joyce, and realistically, no one would have sent Joyce home like that. And I get that Joyce's condition is super hard on Buffy and Dawn. Some of those moments worked. But it was clear that even before all of the demon stuff, the change of setting from the hospital to the house was immediately and constantly a detriment to Joyce's condition. It actually made everything worse. It's almost like she should have been in the hospital, where they can monitor her and take care of her. Dawn being upset that everybody was telling her she wasn't real was a real stretch. Like, an unbelievable stretch. This is, I assume, the start of Dawn's realization that she's the key, but this is the best they could do. Very lame. Riley calling the initiative was idiotic, and even more so that they knew who he was and did everything he told them to do, still treating him like he was their commanding officer. And they're watching him all the time, right? So why did they not bring up his vampire addiction, which I imagine would be a situation that would be frowned upon? And this alien demon handles insanity by going to each insane person individually and vomiting slime into their face until they die? What is its range? How long does it do that? What is the actual criteria for determining who is crazy? And again, it's not invisible. Someone's going to see it, and then what happens? Do they capture it? Do they kill it? And this was Ben's plan? To summon a demon from outer space via a crashing meteor to slither onto crazy people's faces and choke them via goo vomit. I can't believe I just said that sentence out loud.
Well, that might at least answer how it got into the hospital. Maybe he let it in. I don't know. I mean, I realize that's like really stretching, but I don't know.
I cannot imagine what his day-to-day work at the hospital looks like. Yeah, I need to increase this patient's medication. So I hired this group of orphans from California to hide cocaine and Batman action figures, and then they're going to ship them via carrier pigeons across the Pacific to be collected by Indonesian pirates, who trade them down in Australia for emu bushes, which are then freight shipped back to the United States to be sold on the black market, and the money is funneled into the hospital via our meal vendor, who employs a spy that will mention on the third Tuesday of the month that this particular patient seems more tired than usual, indicating to the staff nurse that he needs a dosage increase. God, do I have to do everything around here?
Okay, I thought you were just going to say that more people must die on his shifts than usual. I guess that could be happening too.
Revealing in this episode that Ben is somehow tied to Glory was just something else to gloss over in an episode that had way too many things going on. And the gang was the only group that noticed a giant meteor streaking across the sky and crashing down in the middle of town. Nobody else.
That's a good point too. Well, see, we established that people don't look up. Willow and Tara just happened to be, laying on a rooftop.
Uh-huh.
It fits with the continuity that they've established in the show.
This episode is probably one of the biggest offenders of characters making outlandish assumptions and always being correct. And it felt like a crappy X-Files episode. But the thing that irritated me the most out of this entire thing is that the alien was not invisible. It was in the clear sight line of pretty much everyone throughout the entire episode, and it made a ton of noise, but nobody noticed it. Spike showing up for absolutely no reason in the last 5 minutes of the episode, no less. It was like a producer said, "Hey, we need Spike here." And whoever's writing this episode said, "Yeah, but he has nothing to do with this plot, and there's no reason for him to show up at any of the locations the other characters are at." And the producer said, "Yeah, so what's the problem?" And I know someone's going to argue that, well, he was taking pictures of Buffy for his weird obsession, and that's bullshit. That would be like him showing up to the hospital in this episode saying, I had to go to the bathroom and I just happened to be walking outside the hospital and by coincidence came to the exact wing, floor, and hallway that you guys were located. What's up? This episode needed a major rewrite, especially for an event that is so important for the main character. What a mess. I gave this one a straight F.
Wow, okay. I had given it a C+, but I am lowering it to a C. Because I thought it was good to get an episode so heavy on the Joyce stuff, and I thought that stuff was not bad for the most part. I mean, there were some things that didn't make sense, like you're saying, but I thought it mostly worked in terms of Buffy, Dawn, and Joyce as characters.
Yeah, but that was really 5% of the episode.
No, I disagree. I think it was a big piece of the episode.
Were you not paying attention to the helicopters and slime aliens and shit?
Well, I did think the rest of the episode wasn't great. Riley's subplot didn't get any advancement, despite him showing up a lot in this episode. And again, as soon as they even suspect that a monster might have come out of the meteorite, Riley calls the initiative up. What made this instance special over all the other things that they've been encountering?
Well, he always says, I'm going to call the initiative, but the other ones shut him down. So the fact that he was by himself means that no one was there to say, that's a dumb idea.
Oh, okay. See, that makes well, I mean, it doesn't make sense, but it explains maybe why he didn't want the rest of them to know. I guess that is true that Buffy's been saying no. But why is he, I mean, he's not part of the initiative anymore. Why does he feel so strongly that he needs to call them in?
And like I said before, they treat him like he's still in charge.
Yeah, even though when he called them, at first they didn't seem to know who he was. Even when they got there, you would think he had given them details about what was happening, why they're getting there in the first place. But when they arrive, they still don't know that they're looking for an alien creature. They were asking questions starting from point zero.
And you still gave this one a C.
For the Joyce stuff.
But you're saying this is an average episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
No, I'm saying it's a slightly above average because of the Joyce stuff. And why did he think that storming the house at the end of the episode with all those initiative guys was the right thing to do instead of calling Buffy? Buffy could easily have misinterpreted what was happening and just started staking everybody, which admittedly would have been a better outcome. Like we've been saying, every step of the way, every character came to an immediate conclusion about what they were dealing with, which seems to be the theme of the season. People keep complaining that we don't get the themes, but there it is. I agree with your complaints about Spike showing up. Didn't make sense or fit. Xander, I thought, was especially annoying and pointless in this episode. At this point, I think I hate him more than any other character that has been in the show. He does not belong there. Even more than Riley, he does not belong there. Get him out. Kill him. Do something. If they have all these people that don't have dialogue, why don't you just have that be Xander instead? It was cool to have Joyce learn a little bit about Dawn, but they didn't do much with that yet. And I had a question about people sensing Dawn. So the crazy people that have been affected by Glory or whatever, they seem to be the ones that are able to tell that Dawn doesn't belong there. Is Glory doing that to try to help her detect where the key is? It doesn't seem like it because she doesn't seem to be monitoring the crazy people. But then also Joyce was able to tell that Dawn wasn't real or whatever, but she has a different condition. I mean, I guess it still deals with her brain, but it seems like a big coincidence that she also would detect that Dawn wasn't real. And we know that Ben has a connection to Glory now, so they've at least set something up there, but it remains to be seen if the payoff is going to make any sense or be worth it. But at least that Joyce storyline, I think, is working overall.
No, I agree. With the Joyce stuff, I just think it was overshadowed in this episode when it should not have been.
Yeah, I agree. And it feels like in general they haven't figured out how to make all the different subplots coexist with each other in a way that makes sense or, feels natural at all. Or even to make some of them interesting in the first place, like freaking Riley. We've known for a couple of episodes now that he's getting bitten by vampires or whatever, but I don't really care. But it does feel like things might be picking up, at least. Now that we know that Ben is connected somehow, now that Joyce knows a little bit about Dawn, now that Joyce is going in for her surgery, we're going to see what happens with that. So it seems like maybe things will get better with the next episode, in terms of the main plot, something actually happening, but we'll see.
Okay.